Blade dancing, gut lancing, perfect parrying, backstabbing, loot lifting, feudal fantasy. Welcome to the channel, I'm Rhythmicon and this is Wo Long Fallen Dynasty, a review. Wo Long is the new title from Neo developers Team Ninja. I played and enjoyed the first Neo game, dabbled with the second, played a lot of Final Fantasy Origin Stranger of Paradise, so this kind of game is not totally unfamiliar to me, and anyone who's played any of those games should feel right at home here with this one. I played through this on PC, RTX 3070, AMD Ryzen 7 5800X, but we'll come back to the performance in a little while because, whew, yeah. I'll only be showing footage from the first 4 main missions. There are 16 main missions in total, so hopefully this review won't spoil too much of the game for you. As the title of this video gives away, overall I liked this one. It has some really cool stuff going on, so let's unpack. The story of Wo Long is based on a 14th century novel by Chinese writer Luo Guanzhong, apologies for pronunciation, called Romance of the Three Kingdoms, itself based on a historical text called Records of the Three Kingdoms, an account of, you guessed it, the Three Kingdoms period of Chinese history, which spanned much of the 3rd century AD. It's not a subject I know much about, I'm not familiar with the source material, nor does the game seem that concerned with trying to fill you in, which is absolutely fine in a game like this. Maybe some knowledge of the key figures and events from this period will elevate your enjoyment of the plot, but story definitely takes a back seat here anyway, and honestly, I just wanted that sweet, perfect parry, dopamine, so I didn't invest the time to find out.
Unshakable bond, an unbreakable will.
Rest assured, however, there are plenty of zany cutscenes and quirky characters to keep you ticking over between the action. Similar to the studio's previous games, missions are selected from a map screen that lets you know the difficulty level and rewards you can expect for completion, and there are main missions and side missions. Side missions are mostly repurposed areas and enemies from main missions and seem to serve primarily as a route to additional armor, weapons, and stat improvements. Each level is fairly linear and tightly curated, with some chests and other loot to be found off the beaten path, as well as optional battle flags. We'll come back to those later on. There are plenty of genre-typical moments scattered through the levels for better or worse. Bridges giving way from under you, enemies leaping out from nowhere, giant logs being kicked at you. Generally, I find stuff like this more annoying than anything else, but yet your mileage may vary. Which leads me to the real challenge, of course, the combat. The combat and most of the systems in this game are designed with risk-reward gameplay right at the forefront. The backbone is this spirit gauge, which is essentially a combined resource and stamina bar. When you dodge, block, fail to parry, or when you get hit, a chunk of the bar will deplete, and if it depletes entirely, you'll stand there feeling sorry for yourself for a few seconds, unable to act. But the same is true for your enemies as well. Bring their bar to 0 and you can execute this visceral, high damage attack that is basically the key to winning most encounters in this game. You can fill your gauge by attacking, but pulling off a perfectly timed parry will cause it to ramp up more quickly. And whether it's currently negative or positive, it will slowly reset to neutral during combat if you do nothing. The spirit you accumulate can be spent on empowered heavy attacks, which, similar to parrying an enemy's flashy, red, unblockable critical attack, will reduce your foe's maximum spirit, making it easier to open them up for that big wallop I just talked about. Your spirit can also be spent on special abilities unique to each of the 13 melee weapon types, and a pretty decent number of wizardry spells. We'll talk about those more in a minute. In addition to all this, you get to select a divine beast, more of which you can unlock as the story progresses, and these are tied to various different boons in battle, and each has its own powerful tide-turning attack that you can fire off when you've maxed out its gauge. These are pretty cool. There's a fair few, and holding onto them only to call upon them when you're in a tight spot, surviving by the skin of your teeth, it feels good. Combat is generally super enjoyable and satisfying. The parry animations are great, and you can literally parry everything in this game. Everything, man. Swords, hammers, arrows, fireballs. Who doesn't love shaking off fireballs with a katana? Much of the time, you can take a quieter approach to combat, sneaking up on enemies and pulling off a deadly backstab. Some enemy groups are connected together, indicated by a triangular icon, and it's a valid and encouraged approach to stealthily pick off the smaller ones, lowering the max spirit gauge of the stronger ones until the encounter becomes more manageable. As with most Souls-like games, bosses are a highlight. There are a ton of incredible designs and encounters at play here, from your standard dude with spear to amorphous beasts so large they barely fit on the screen. These encounters are mostly top-notch and a fair challenge, with the exception of one or two that were more irksome than they were enjoyable, but that's probably par for the course here. For anyone concerned about the difficulty level in this game, there's definitely an early wall, and you might find Wolong's tutorial boss to be unreasonably difficult at first. I certainly did, but what the game is asking of you here is to understand early on how it expects you to play, and once you start to become accustomed to the aggressive, timing-heavy flow of fighting, you'll start to tear through the levels far more easily. The general cadence of combat is probably best likened to Sekiro, where you end up in this satisfying dance with your foe that almost tips the scales from action RPG into rhythm game, and it all comes together most of the time. Sometimes when you're engaged with multiple targets, particularly when you're in a tight space, trying to fight them off can end up feeling frantic and somewhat frustrating. There were times when I was trying to dodge the target in front of me, only to end up parrying the target behind me, spinning the camera around and disorienting me. It feels kind of clumsy to have dodge and parry on the same input, but thankfully situations like this don't arise all that often. Furthermore, I occasionally had issues with non-responsive inputs. It's an issue I've had with Team Ninja games in the past. Sometimes you're mashing the button to heal up, but your dude just does not want to drink that potion. Doesn't happen often enough to be a huge problem, but when it does, it's usually at the worst possible time. Wolong is prone to the odd bit of dodgy difficulty tuning at times, even beyond that early wall I just talked about, depending on how you choose to play. Personally, I keep the AI companions off because the game feels much too easy fighting alongside them, but playing totally by yourself can lead to some arbitrary difficulty spiking that might have you feeling annoyed or in need of a break. That said, there are a variety of peripheral systems and mechanics in this game designed to assist you in your playthrough, so it's up to you how you take advantage of these. Naturally, there's good old-fashioned leveling up, where you can spend your accumulated chi, gained from besting beasts, to sink points into 5 different phases. Essentially, categories tied to the game's 5 elements that will each award you different stat increases. Your chi counter actually goes gold in this game when you're carrying enough to level up. I've never seen this in one of these games before, and I thought it was a pretty nice touch. If you want to bring other players along to help you out, you can pop a consumable tiger seal mid-level, which will beckon players into your world, or you can host an online lobby. Stronger allies will see their stats scaled down to match the host player, so don't expect a hard carry from your buddy with 60 hours playtime, but ganging up on your opponents will definitely make your experience a bit less intense. I didn't test the co-op in this game, but I have played multiplayer extensively in previous Team Ninja games. It's always a fun time. There are a bunch of different consumable items to aid you, like additional healing, a quick boost of your spirit gauge, even items to stop you losing morality on your next death, but a lot of it is sparsely found, so you'll want to hold on to that stuff until you really need it. Wizardry spells are learned through a fairly standard skill tree experience: level up, earn points, spend points, pop the spells on your HUD. Each one has a minimum required phase level, minimum morality level, more on that in a sec, and a spirit cost corresponding to how powerful or useful the spell generally is. There's a blacksmith you'll encounter, firstly in the midst of your missions, then early on she moves to the game's hub area and you can make use of her skills to upgrade, dismantle, socket special gems into your gear. Fairly standard RPG fare, but useful nonetheless. She'll even let you transmog or glamour your weapons and armor for that classic Fashion Souls experience, so yeah, go nuts. On that note, there are plenty of armor drops and weapons to be picked up. I want to say it's not quite as egregious as Neo or Stranger of Paradise. I feel like I spent 50% of my playtime with those titles, sifting through gear drops, but you'll probably still find yourself in menus regularly, trying to determine what gear is worth keeping and what to break down or sell. Most notable and unique is perhaps the morality and fortitude system I mentioned earlier in the review. Both you and every single enemy in this game display a morality level, essentially a gauge of overall strength, and the disparity between these levels determines things like how much damage you dish out and take. It's a general guideline of how difficult a given encounter is likely to be. You'll gain morality as you dispatch enemies, but getting hit by critical attacks will see your morality drop, as will dying, the latter of which will cause the beast that slew you to gain morality and make your next encounter with them all the more difficult. You can try to best them a second time, earning your morality and lost chi back if you're successful, or you can give them a wide berth. That's entirely up to you. You'll also encounter these battle flags as you go through each level. There are big ones, there are small ones. The big ones act as your typical bonfire rest point. Replenish your healing charges, revive everything you've killed, etc, etc. but exploring a level more thoroughly and oftentimes vanquishing some of the tougher mini-boss type enemies will see you rewarded with the opportunity to raise additional flags. Planting any flags, big or small, will increase your fortitude level, and this is essentially a safety net for your morality level. When you die, your morality level cannot drop below that of your fortitude level. It's a pretty cool way to be rewarded for accepting the risks involved with exploration and conquering some of the level's more imposing creatures. Nab that next flag and your losses will be further minimized for the rest of the mission. You'll start each level at morality 0, so this is a process you'll go through on each new outing, but I enjoyed this system. You'll get to morality 20 or something and you'll start to question whether it's worth going for that loot chest you can see behind some giant monster and risk losing levels, or whether you should try holding onto your advantage for a leg up on the main boss. It's worth mentioning that you can also give yourself a temporary boost of morality by offering up one of your healing charges to these purple graves belonging to other players who've died in their world. I didn't find myself using this feature all that often, but it all feeds into the game's themes of risk-reward. Team Ninja really want you to think things through here and pick your battles wisely. Now let's talk a bit about visuals and performance. As I said, I played this on a fairly decent PC and the game looks pretty good most of the time if you max out the graphics. Trouble is, doing that led to more than a little bit of slowdown and stuttering, to the point I cranked most of the settings down to medium or low, after which the game looked pretty iffy. It's not a big deal a lot of the time, but it can be jarring when it catches your attention. I'd maybe recommend waiting for a patch or two for this one. However, if Team Ninja's previous titles are anything to go by, you may well find that this never gets completely ironed out. Overall, this game features one of the best implementations of a risk-reward combat system I can recall. All of the game's systems come together cohesively to push this concept, as does the moment-to-moment combat, like deciding whether or not to edge your combo just that little bit longer in order to build up your gauge and pull off that max power spirit damage. When you lose and get punished, it can obviously be a little frustrating, but when it pays off, it's definitely a great feeling. So, to sum up, Wo Long falls mostly in line with what we've come to expect from a Team Ninja game and Souls-like games in general. This is definitely one of the more accessible games of its kind. Between its generally lower difficulty level and a day one release on Game Pass, it feels a little like Team Ninja are trying to cast a wider net, bring more people into their games, and that's totally fine. It hasn't cost the game any quality, and hopefully more people can enjoy the studio's efforts now than ever before. That's all for this one, folks. I've been Rhythmicon, and I liked Wo Long Fallen Dynasty. See you next time.